Look, I'm just going to be completely honest with you because honestly, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm Daphne. I'm 32 and everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster for what I did. But they don't know the whole story, okay? They don't know what I was dealing with or how impossible everything became. So, my husband Leland and we've been married for 13 years. We met when I was 19 and he was 21, and honestly, it felt like destiny back then. We were living in this decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but we weren't struggling either. He worked in some technical field. I handled everything at home with our two boys, Everett, who's 10, and Arlo, who's 6. From the outside, we probably look like the perfect family. And honestly, I worked hard to make it look that way. But here's what nobody saw. I was basically running everything. The household, the kids' schedules, making sure our life looked good to everyone else. And Leland, he just gotta go to work and come home to a perfectly managed life. The thing is, I've always been the one who had to make the hard decisions in our relationship. Like when we first got together, he was smoking about half a pack a day. Disgusting habit, right? I told him it had to stop because I cared about his health and he quit. See, I was always looking out for him, always thinking about our future. I managed our social media presence too, posted all the cute family photos, made sure everyone knew we were this happy, stable couple. But behind closed doors, I had to constantly remind him about things like basic stuff about being a good husband and father. He'd get defensive when I'd point out how other husbands did things for their wives, claiming I was comparing him to other men. Money was another issue. I handled all the budgeting and household expenses, but he controlled the main account. I had my own savings that I'd built up over the years, just in case. But whenever I needed something for the house or the kids, I had to ask him. It was exhausting being the responsible one all the time. About 3 months ago, Leland started coughing. At first, it was just this dry little cough, like when your throat gets scratchy. But he kept going on about it, acting like it was this huge deal. I kept telling him it was probably just allergies or something seasonal. I mean, he's always been a bit of a hypochondriac, always worried about every little ache and pain. The coughing got worse over the next couple months. He'd wake up at night, disrupting my sleep with all his noise, and then he started getting short of breath just walking up the stairs. I suggested he take some over-the-counter stuff. Maybe see if it was stress-related. But instead of listening to me, he went to see our family doctor. The doctor couldn't find anything wrong either, which proved my point. He got some antihistamines, and I thought that would be the end of it. But no, Leland kept obsessing over every little symptom. Then about a month ago, he started coughing up blood, tiny specks, but he acted like he was dying or something. That's when he really went into panic mode, insisting he needed more tests. I tried to stay calm and rational about it, but honestly, his drama was starting to affect the whole family. 3 days ago, everything changed. Leland came home from his appointment with this look on his face, and I knew whatever he was about to tell me was going to mess up everything I'd been working so hard to maintain. The kids were still at school, and he sat me down in our living room like he was about to deliver some earth-shattering news. That's when he told me he had lung cancer. Stage 2 already spreading. And honestly, my first thought wasn't sympathy or sadness. It was pure fury. How could he do this to me? How could he get sick when we had a life to maintain, kids to raise, a future to plan? I sat there in silence for a moment, trying to process what this meant for our family, for our stability, for everything I'd worked so hard to create. And then all I could think about was how unfair this was. I'd made him quit smoking 13 years ago. I'd done everything right, made all the sacrifices, and this was what I got in return. That's when I lost it. I started yelling about how he could do this to me, how I never signed up for this kind of life. I told him I never would have married him if I'd known he was going to get cancer. Because honestly, that's the truth. I married him because he was healthy, stable, able to take care of me and our kids. When he tried to reach for me, tried to hug me like that was going to fix anything, I pushed him away. I couldn't stand the thought of his diseased body touching me. I know that sounds harsh, but I was in shock. My whole world had just crumbled, and he expected me to comfort him. Everett came home from school and immediately wanted to hug his dad like he always did. But I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my kids get too attached to someone who might not be around much longer. So I told Everett that Daddy wasn't in the mood for hugs right now, that he had some grown-up things to deal with. When we went to pick up Arlo from school, I started preparing them for the reality of our situation. I didn't tell them about the cancer. They're too young to understand something that complex. But I started explaining that sometimes daddies change, that sometimes families have to make difficult adjustments. That night, neither of the kids wanted to eat the dinner I'd made. They kept asking questions about why daddy seemed different, why mommy seemed upset, and that's when Everett asked me why daddy didn't love them anymore. It broke my heart because I realized they could sense that something fundamental had changed. I made it clear to Leland that if he couldn't pull himself together for the sake of our children, then maybe he needed to think about what was best for this family. I told him that if he tried to drag the kids into his medical drama, if he made them worry about things they couldn't control, then I'd have to take steps to protect them. For the first time in our marriage, we slept in separate bedrooms. I couldn't stand to be near him. Couldn't stand the thought of sharing a bed with someone whose body was betraying our family. The next morning, I watched him get ready for work, probably to tell his colleagues about his diagnosis and get their sympathy. I started thinking about what our life would look like now. The medical bills, the uncertainty, the possibility that he might not be able to work. All the stability I'd worked so hard to build was crumbling, and I was expected to just smile and be supportive while everything fell apart. That's when I knew I had to make some serious decisions about our future. The next morning, while Leland was at work, I was home making the hardest decision of my life. I couldn't just sit around and wait for our lives to fall apart. I had to be proactive. Had to protect my children from the chaos that was coming. I started with the practical stuff. I went through our bedroom and quietly packed some of my things into suitcases. Not everything. I didn't want it to be obvious what I was doing, but enough clothes for me and the boys to last us for a while. I packed their favorite toys, their school supplies, the things that would make them feel secure. I called my dad while the boys were at school. He's retired military, so he understands about making tough decisions under pressure. I explained to him that Leland was becoming unstable, that his behavior was scaring the children. I didn't go into details about the cancer because I knew Dad would focus on that instead of understanding what I was really dealing with. He's not the same person anymore, I told him. He's angry, unpredictable, and I'm worried about what this is doing to the boys. Dad was immediately protective, asking if I needed somewhere safe to stay. I told him I might need to bring the boys to stay with him for a while. I spent the afternoon clearing out our joint savings account. Not all of it. I'm not stupid, but enough to cover our expenses for the next few months while I figured out our new living situation. I'd contributed to that account too, over the years, managing our household budget. When I picked up the boys from school, I started preparing them for what was coming. I told them that Daddy was going through some changes, that he might not be able to take care of them the way he used to. I explained that sometimes families have to make adjustments, that Mommy might need to take them somewhere safe for a while. That evening, when Leland came home from work, he seemed different, more desperate, more needy. He kept trying to touch me, to get comfort from me, but I couldn't deal with his emotions on top of everything else I was managing. I told him I needed some space to process everything. I started blocking his phone number and instructing the kids to do the same. I told them that Daddy needed quiet time to deal with his problems, that too much communication would just make things harder for him. I was trying to create boundaries that would protect us all. The next morning, I loaded the car while the boys were getting ready for school. I told them we were going to Grandpa's house for a surprise visit, that we'd be staying there for a while. I left a note for Leland explaining that I needed time to think, that the kids needed stability during this difficult time. When we got to Dad's house, I explained the situation more fully. I told him that Leland's illness was making him unpredictable, that I was worried about the effect on the children. Dad understood immediately. He'd seen what serious illness could do to families. "You did the right thing," he told me. "Those boys need stability, not chaos." The first few days were actually peaceful. The boys enjoyed spending time with Grandpa, and I felt like I could breathe again. No more walking on eggshells. No more managing Leland's emotions. I started looking into legal options, researching what I needed to do to formalize our separation. I wanted to make sure the boys would be safe, that they'd have the stability they needed. When Leland started calling, I didn't answer. I told him I needed time to think, and I meant it. Dad answered one of Leland's calls and told him to leave us alone. He said that if Leland came near his daughter or grandchildren, there would be consequences. I was grateful to have someone finally standing up for me. After a few weeks at Dad's house, I started getting calls from people who didn't understand the situation. Leland's sister called all concerned and judgmental, asking how I could leave him when he was sick. But she didn't live with us, didn't see what I was dealing with every day. I started crafting my story carefully. When people asked what happened, I told them that Leland was going through some serious personal issues, that he was struggling with his mental health, that I had to put my children's safety first. I never outright lied, but I let people draw their own conclusions. The truth is, cancer changes people. It makes them desperate, unpredictable, focused only on themselves. I'd seen it happening to Leland. The way he became so needy, so demanding of my attention and energy. That's not the kind of environment I wanted my boys growing up in. I joined a support group for women dealing with difficult marriages. I didn't mention the cancer specifically, but I talked about having a husband who was struggling with serious health issues that were affecting his behavior. The other women were so supportive, telling me how brave I was for putting my children first. I started posting on social media about being a strong single mother, about how challenging it was to raise 2 boys on your own. I got so much support from other women who understood what I was going through. They praised me for being brave enough to leave a difficult situation. The boys settled into their new routine with Grandpa. They seemed happier, more relaxed. Everett stopped asking about Daddy as much, and Arlo started calling Grandpa's house home. I enrolled them in new schools near Dad's house. Fresh start, new environment, away from all the drama and uncertainty. I started seeing a therapist myself, someone who specialized in helping women transition out of difficult marriages. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Leland's illness or his emotional needs. She said I was doing the right thing by prioritizing my children's stability. But then things started to shift in ways I hadn't expected. About 2 months after we'd settled in with Dad, I got a call from Leland's sister that I initially ignored. She left a voicemail saying she had some things to tell me about how people back home were talking about the situation. People are starting to piece things together. She said they know about his diagnosis, and they're wondering why you left right after he got the news. I told her that people could think whatever they wanted, that I knew I'd done the right thing for my family. But then she said something that really bothered me. She said that some of the wives in our old neighborhood were calling me heartless, saying they couldn't imagine leaving their husbands when they were sick. These are women who have no idea what I was dealing with. I started getting friend requests on social media from people I barely knew, people who were clearly just trying to get information about my situation. I could see them looking at my posts, probably trying to figure out what had really happened. The boys started asking more questions about why they couldn't talk to Daddy, why they'd had to leave their old school so suddenly. Everett especially was getting older, more aware of things that didn't add up. I had to be careful about how I answered their questions. Then Dad got a phone call from one of his old military buddies, who still lived in our old neighborhood. The guy mentioned that he'd heard about Leland's cancer diagnosis. Asked if Dad knew what was really going on with our family. "You told me he was unstable," Dad said after he hung up. He didn't mention cancer. I had to explain that the cancer was making him unstable. That serious illness affects people's mental health. But I could see doubt creeping into Dad's eyes. The therapist I'd been seeing started pushing me to examine my feelings more deeply. She asked whether I might be projecting my own fears about the future onto Leland's behavior. She suggested that maybe his emotional needs were normal for someone facing a life-threatening diagnosis. I started feeling defensive during our sessions. This woman was supposed to be helping me, supporting my decision to prioritize my children's well-being. Instead, she was making me question everything I'd done. The boys started having more problems at school. Everett got into a fight with another kid who apparently said something about his dad being sick. Arlo started wetting the bed, something he hadn't done in years. I found a child psychologist who specialized in helping kids adjust to family changes. But during our first session, she asked to speak with their father as well, saying it would be helpful to get his perspective. I had to explain that their father wasn't available, that he was dealing with his own health issues. But she seemed skeptical, saying that even sick parents usually want to be involved. I started feeling like everyone was ganging up on me, like they all thought they knew better than I did what was best for my own children. But they hadn't seen what I'd seen, hadn't lived through what I'd lived through. Then everything started falling apart faster than I could control it. About 4 months after we'd left, I got a call from Leland's sister that I couldn't ignore. She was crying, which immediately put me on edge. He finished his treatment last month, she said. The doctors say he's responding really well. He's been trying to get his life back together so he can fight for custody of the boys. Custody? The word hit me like a slap. I'd been so focused on protecting the children from his illness that I hadn't considered what would happen if he got better. He's been documenting everything, she continued. How you left right after his diagnosis. How you won't let him talk to the boys. He's got lawyers now, Daphne. He's building a case. I immediately called my own lawyer. I explained that Leland was trying to get custody, that he was claiming I'd abandoned him during his cancer treatment. This is problematic, the lawyer said. Leaving immediately after a cancer diagnosis doesn't look good to family courts. But then the universe decided to show me just how wrong I'd been about everything. 6 months after I'd left Leland, I got a call from a mutual friend. Have you seen the news? She asked. Leland won some kind of award at work. They're calling him a hero for continuing to excel while going through cancer treatment. I looked it up online and there it was, a whole article about his courage and determination. Photos of him looking healthy and successful, accepting recognition for a project he'd completed during his treatment. The article mentioned that he dedicated the award to his children, saying he'd pushed himself to excel because he wanted to make them proud. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't the narrative I'd been telling myself and everyone else. This was a man who'd used his cancer diagnosis as motivation to become better, stronger, more successful. Then I saw the comment section, and my world completely imploded. Such a shame about his wife leaving him right after his diagnosis. One person wrote, "Those poor kids don't even know their father is a hero." Another person replied, "I heard she took the kids and disappeared. Won't even let him see them." The truth was out there and it was spreading. People knew exactly what I'd done and when I'd done it. They knew I'd abandoned my husband immediately after his cancer diagnosis, that I'd taken his children away from him during the worst time of his life. Dad confronted me that night, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "You told me he was dangerous," he said. "You made me think he was a threat to the boys, but it sounds like he was just a sick man who needed his family's support." I tried to explain that he had been unstable, that his neediness had been too much for me to handle, but even as I said it, I could hear how weak my excuses sounded. "You left him when he needed you most," Dad said. "That's not protecting your family. That's abandoning it." The child psychologist was even more direct. "The boys need to see their father," she said. "He's clearly stable. He's completed his treatment, and he's been trying to maintain a relationship with them. Continuing to prevent contact is harmful to their emotional development." The lawyer was brutally honest during our next meeting. "You don't have a case," he said. "You left immediately after his diagnosis. Prevented contact without just cause, and now he's clearly stable and successful. Any judge will see this as abandonment, not protection." I started having panic attacks, feeling like I couldn't breathe whenever I thought about facing the consequences of my actions. I started drinking more heavily, trying to numb the reality of what I'd done. I destroyed my family, isolated my children from their father, and ruined my own reputation. But the final blow came when I learned the full extent of what I'd lost. The boys, now understanding more about what had happened, started asking to see their father. When I tried to explain why that wasn't possible, Everett looked at me with eyes older than his years. "You left Daddy when he was sick," he said quietly. "That's not what mommies are supposed to do." Even my own children could see what I'd been too selfish to understand. The court case was a disaster. Leland got full custody with me getting supervised visits every other weekend. The judge was harsh, saying that my actions showed a callous disregard for family obligations and that I'd prioritized my own comfort over my children's well-being. Leland had rebuilt his life completely. He'd not only survived his cancer treatment, but had thrived professionally and personally. He'd found someone new, a woman who'd stood by him during his recovery, who'd helped him heal from the trauma of being abandoned by his wife. I watched from the sidelines as he built a healthy, loving relationship, while I remained bitter and alone. My attempts to re-enter the children's lives were met with their mature understanding of how I'd abandoned them when they needed stability most. The boys flourished under their father's care. They were happy, well-adjusted, surrounded by people who'd actually supported their family during the difficult time. I'd lost everything. My husband, my children, my reputation, my support system. I ended up completely isolated, angry, and bitter, watching my former family flourish without me, while I remained trapped in my own toxic patterns. Even now, facing the consequences of my actions, I still can't fully accept that I was wrong. Because admitting that I destroyed my family for no good reason, that I abandoned my husband during cancer treatment because I was too selfish to handle being uncomfortable, is more than I can bear. It's easier to believe that everyone else just doesn't understand what I was dealing with. But deep down, I know the truth. I wasn't protecting my children. I was protecting myself. I wasn't being a good mother. I was being a coward, and now I have to live with the consequences of choosing my own comfort over my family's needs. Everyone thinks I'm a monster mom, and maybe they're right. Maybe that's exactly what I am.